much. Let's head to the Middle East because the far-right Israeli minister Bezalel Smotrich has said it is time to open the gates of hell on Hamas and push ahead with a full military occupation after the armed group rejected Israel's latest ceasefire offer. Hamas's chief negotiator said they would not agree to partial deals, saying they would exchange all of the remaining hostages for Palestinian prisoners and an end to the war. Well, hospitals in Gaza say at least 23 people were killed overnight and dozens more injured in Israeli strikes across the territory. There's been no immediate response from the Israeli military. Well, let's head to our correspondent in Jerusalem, Gary O'Donoghue. And Gary, worth putting today's developments in context, isn't it? Because there was a ceasefire hostage agreed by both sides, which Israel broke by not implementing phase 2 and phase 3. So Israel's proposals today are in place of that original deal, aren't they?
Yeah, it's a month. In fact, it's a month to the day since Israel resumed airstrikes on Gaza, March the 18th. And really a couple of weeks before that, we were meant to have entered into phase 2 of the negotiations. Now, Israel at that time proposed an extension along with the US. Hamas rejected it, and then Israel resumed its bombing, having stopped any aid getting into Gaza from the beginning of March. So really since then, since over the last month, the situation has been daily, nightly airstrikes by Israel. Local health officials, Hamas health officials on the ground say more than 1,600 people have died in that period of time. And the UN says that, well, practically 500,000 people have been displaced, partly by having to move from their houses being destroyed, but also by these what Israel calls evacuation orders, what the UN calls displacement orders by Israel, asking them to move towards the coast, particularly in the south. Now, in the last few days, we've also seen some strikes in those areas where the civilians have been moving to, particularly these tented camps near Khan Yunis just in from the coast. And certainly the Children's Agency, the UN Children's Agency, says some of the images we've seen from children dying in some of those strikes, appearing to die in those strikes, should shock us all to the core. So several dozen casualties per night. Israel saying it's targeting terrorists, naming some of those it's targeted, particularly one individual earlier this week who Israel says was Hamas' main arms smuggler in terms of getting their munitions into the Strip. But even though Israel, Matthew, is occupying around 30% of Gaza now on the ground, there isn't actually much on the ground fighting. Hamas, either through a lack of capacity or through some sort of strategic decision, are not really engaging very much with the Israelis on the ground. All these deaths are happening through airstrikes. Now, Israel says it takes every kind of mitigation it can in terms of precision munitions, intelligence, air surveillance, all that kind of thing. But still, the UN agencies are saying that this is now probably the worst humanitarian failure of this generation, and in the meantime, there's no aid at all getting into the Strip.
Gary, we'll have more on that particular thought in a moment or two. A quick, brief final thought, because a couple of months ago there was a real push from the US administration. Now, of course, they're dealing with Ukraine. We've been covering that on the programme. There's trade issues, there's Iran, there's deportations. Does it feel where you are that the focus still is very much on that situation there?
I don't think people feel that there's as much focus here as there was. I mean, if you think of the simple fact that Steve Witkoff, the president's envoy to the Middle East, is also the envoy for Ukraine. He's also the envoy for the Iran talks. Iran talks this weekend in Rome. We've had the Paris talks on Ukraine this week. It feels a little bit like the US, the attention of the US has moved away from this in the intractability and the fact that there's nothing on the table that either side are going to come together on in particular. And how this war ends is, frankly, anyone's guess, because no one knows what will come afterwards. Israel insists on the complete destruction and disarmament of Hamas. Hamas is still holding on to those hostages. It's really its only bargaining chip in that sense. And there are 59 of those, 24 who are said to be alive. So we're in a standoff at the moment. In the meantime, a lot of civilians are suffering.